Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Language Arts Gallery. Today, we're going to continue with our academic writing and research course, and we're going to talk about part 2 of giving a conference presentation. So remember, we've talked a lot about the basic presentation structure in our last lesson, and we're going to focus today on our body, our conclusion. We're going to talk about signposting. We're going to talk about dealing with questions, and we're going to look at a very brief example of a conference presentation. So I want you to think a little bit about presentations that you may have given, whether it's in high school or perhaps as an undergraduate. How do you think a talk at a conference might be a little different than a presentation that you might have given in high school? Well, in all likelihood, a presentation that you've given previously, such as in high school, probably wasn't research-based. It was probably informative, it might have been explanatory, but if you're giving a talk at a conference, very often you're going to be presenting research. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes you might be giving a workshop or you might be sharing a particular teaching methodology that you find is very effective. But usually, even if you're given a presentation such as a workshop, it's going to be research-based. It's going to be grounded in the research. So our introduction is going to be quite similar, right? It's our body that's going to be a fair bit different. So let's look at a traditional presentation. And again, this is going to be a research-based presentation that we're contrasting with a more traditional presentation. So when we talk about the body of our presentation, we're going to present three main points. Now, this is very similar to everything that we've talked about with our academic essay. Each main point is similar to our body paragraphs in an academic essay. We approach each main point in an academic essay with its own body paragraph. We present that main point in the topic sentence, and then we provide supporting details to tell more about that main point. If we look at the body of a presentation, we can see that we've got three main points and we've got supporting details for each point. Very, very similar. So let's look at an example. Here's an example of a body of a presentation, and this is for a presentation on English exam preparation. Now, our speaker presents three main points. The first is find a suitable environment. The second is to take good notes. And the third is to get plenty of rest. Now, if we look under each of those main points, the author or the speaker has supporting details for each. So what does a suitable environment look like? Well, it should be quiet, it should be well lit, and you should have access to snacks and drinks. I also think that's really important when you're studying. The second main point, you're going to take good notes, focus on your big ideas from either the book or from your lectures, rewrite your notes, and use a highlighter for important points. And your third main point, don't study all night before the test. Don't cram. Review a little bit in the morning. And don't drink too much coffee so you sleep well and you won't be nervous. Now let's talk about signposting. Signposting is really important because remember, when we're presenting these ideas in an academic essay, we've got clear delineation between each body paragraph. And we still use transition words in our writing. Now, signposting is like transition words for our presentation. Just like we say, I'd like to begin by, further, next, we're going to use similar language when we're giving an oral presentation. So let's look at each of these here. We've got our three main points. And the author or the speaker says, I'd like to begin by talking about. And after they finish discussing what a suitable environment looks like, they would say, now that we've discussed what a suitable environment looks like, let's move to taking good notes, or let's move to our next point, which is the importance of taking good notes. So when we're presenting at a conference, it's going to be a little bit different. So we still have three main points, but we're structuring it in a slightly different manner. We're going to start by talking about our research questions or the aim of our study. So of course, we're presenting what's important for our research, what we're trying to accomplish. Then our second point is how did we answer this question? What are the research methods? And then finally, we're going to present our findings and we're going to present our discussion. So this is really similar to our dissertation or thesis format. So let's look at some key language that we can use in each section here. So when we're presenting the aim of our study or our research question, we might say things like, the aim of this study is to, this research investigates, one main question is, or we might say, two research questions inform this study. Our second main point is going to be our methods section, and we want to talk about the research paradigm that we've selected. We could say something like, we conducted a qualitative study, a quantitative study, a mixed methods study. Data were collected through surveys and semi-structured interviews. Participants included. So we're going to tell who are the participants in the study. We might talk about our population, our sampling methods. You might choose to address issues of validity and reliability. You might talk about how you triangulated your data. And then finally, your key findings. You're going to say, we found that a significant result was, or participants reported. Again, and I always mention this to my students, this was something I had a professor highlight to me. Be careful with this word. We use this word a lot. We say a significant result, particularly when we're talking about quantitative research. We want to differentiate between something that's important and something that is statistically significant. So we do want to be clear when we use language like that. So this is a great opportunity for you to think about the research that you've done and how will you structure your presentation. Now, if you're simply looking to improve your presentation skills and you've not done your research yet, you can organize a presentation with three main points and three supporting details on a topic of your choosing. So I'm going to take a look at this example. Now, this is related to our previous presentation where we talked about finding or studying for an English exam. So our first point is finding a suitable study environment. I'd like to begin by describing a suitable study environment. You want to ensure that the area you've chosen is quiet and well lit. Also, you may get hungry while studying. Ensure that you have access to food and drinks to keep your energy levels up. Next, I'd like to address the importance of taking good notes. Your note should focus on the important ideas from the textbook or your teacher's lecture. After class, make sure you rewrite the notes so they're neat and easy to understand. Finally, use a highlighter to note the most important points for your test. Now, I'd like to move to my last point. Being well rested for your exam. Don't stay up all night studying before your test. Make sure you get a good night's sleep. You can review a little bit the morning of the test, but don't cram. Finally, don't have too much coffee before your test, as it can make you nervous. So hopefully you've been able to organize your three big points for your presentation. Now let's talk about something that's really important, staying calm when you're giving your presentation. Let me just begin by saying it's very natural to be nervous. I think the best way to stay calm for a presentation is to be well prepared. Even if you're initially a little bit nervous, if you've practiced frequently, those initial nerves will wear off and you'll be able to present confidently. So Again, people always get nervous, but I want to talk about some ways that you can stay calm during your presentation. Take deep breaths. It's very important. This, I think, to me, I think practicing is the most important thing to be prepared for a presentation. But I think the second best piece of advice for staying calm during a presentation is to build rapport with your audience. If you feel like you can have small talk before the presentation, you can chat to the people that you're going to be presenting to, I think that really helps you to relax. It helps you to be comfortable and confident, and that's going to show when you do present. Avoid caffeine. I would say have your caffeine, just don't have too much. Arrive early. The last thing you want to be doing is rushing to get to the presentation. I think that makes all of us nervous when we're running to get into the room, and then we're huffing and puffing and we finally get there and our heart's beating, and then we've got to stand up and give our presentation. We're already worked up. That's very difficult. Again, most important, practice. The key to being calm is being well prepared. And don't think about failure. I think it's important that we visualize success when we're preparing to give our presentation. Finally, getting to the conclusion. When we give our conclusion, we want to summarize the big points in our presentation. If necessary, we're going to make a recommendation. We want to thank the audience for their attention, and we want to invite questions. Now, this is a little bit different than what we would do in an academic essay. Normally, we don't thank our audience and invite questions when we're writing an academic essay, but we will do that when we're giving a presentation. Remember to signpost. In conclusion, focus on your study results or what the big takeaway was. This study shows that multilingual doctoral students are highly capable, but face systemic barriers when it comes to academic writing. Or, to sum up, when we use expressions like in conclusion or to sum up, we let our audience know that we're coming to the end of our presentation. So making a recommendation, again, this is going to depend on the topic. If you're giving a traditional presentation and you're talking about all the reasons why you should plan a trip to Vietnam, you might say, I suggest you visit Vietnam, or I recommend that you visit Vietnam. If you're giving a workshop and you're talking about a particular teaching method, you might say, I suggest. You might use softer language. You might say, this is an option for teachers who want to incorporate academic writing into their reading workshop lessons. Remember to thank your audience. You can say things like, many thanks for your attention. I want to thank you all for being such an attentive audience. And you're going to invite questions. Now I'll try to answer any questions that you have. Can I answer any questions? Are there any questions? Do you have any questions, or are there any final questions? Now, remember, in your introduction, you will have set out rules for questions. Hopefully, you've got a good audience that will have abided by those rules, but unfortunately, that is not always the case. So I want to go ahead and I want to highlight how to deal with questions during your presentation. You may come across someone who simply can't resist interrupting you. Don't be confrontational. Don't say, excuse me, I said I'm answering questions at the end. Believe me, everyone will understand that that person was wrong for interrupting you. Deal with it diplomatically and politely, and you can say things like, that's a great point, and we'll be examining this point in more detail later in the presentation. That's great if the person's asking a question you haven't gotten to yet. Don't say, I haven't gotten there yet, okay? Be polite, be professional. You might say, I'd like to deal with this question later, if I may. or I'm going to come back to this question later in my talk, or I'm going to come back to it at the end of my presentation. Perhaps you'd like to raise this point at the end, or I'm not going to comment on this now, but I will get to it later in my presentation, or I will address it once I'm finished presenting, right? So that way we've validated the person's question, but we've also addressed the fact that questions are to be held until the end. So let's go ahead here and take a look at what a conclusion might look like. We can say, to sum up, doing well on exams is important. Be sure to find a suitable study environment. Take good notes and be well rested. Or, I want to thank you all for your attention today. Are there any questions that I can answer? In our conference presentations, our conclusion is going to be quite similar. We're going to summarize, we're going to highlight the significance, the takeaway. We are going to highlight implications or next steps. In other words, where should future research take us, right? Why is this study important? What still needs to be done? And then we can call for questions or comments, right? Remember, if you're at a conference, it's all about knowledge sharing. So further discussion and discussion about the topic of the presentation is really important. So sometimes people who are viewing your presentation, they're passionate about the topic. They may not have a particular question, but they may want to comment and discuss what it is that you've talked about. So now I want you to take a moment and practice putting your conclusion together. Hopefully you've already done your introduction. In our last video today, you've come up with your 3 main points and hopefully some supporting details. Now I want you to think about, how would you summarize? Do you need to make a recommendation? How would you thank the audience? And finally, what questions would you or how would you invite questions from the audience? So now I want to talk about tips for a virtual presentation. I want you to be sure that you're talking to the camera. I've tried to make sure that I was doing this today because I didn't want to be looking at myself and saying, make sure you talk to the camera. But this is something I think when we're giving a presentation in Zoom and we've got a picture of ourselves there, it's really hard not to look at ourselves when we're presenting, but try to remember to look at that camera. This is really important if you've got a split screen. I've got a split screen over there where I can see my participants when I'm teaching a class. It's very easy to always be looking at your students and not be looking at your content. That's okay, I think, when you're teaching a class because you want to validate your students. But when you're giving a conference presentation and it's virtual, remember, you want to be looking at the camera. Think about your background, something neutral. I've got a very basic background. It's a virtual background. I would look for something like that. Very often conferences will send you virtual backgrounds that they ask you to use, or your institution might ask that you present with a virtual background that indicates what institution you're affiliated with. Even though you're in a virtual environment, remember to try to engage your audience right away. And I know it's hard, especially when we're in a virtual environment where we've got hundreds of people. Try to engage them as best you can. If possible, use breakout rooms, especially if you're doing a virtual workshop. I encourage you to use breakout rooms to get your audience members involved. Even though you're presenting virtually, you can't be walking around like you would be in a physical classroom, but still try to be as animated as possible. Try to use body language. If possible, use a standing desk. And finally, when your presentation is over, using online surveys to collect feedback. It's much easier than sending someone an email much later after the fact. Your presentation is fresh in their mind and they're able to give you honest and timely feedback. So now I want to take a quick look at a sample conference presentation. Now this is very abridged. So here, slide my face down here. We've got our introduction, which we've talked about last week. I would have gone over this example last week. Okay, so here our speaker, Samuel Tesfaye, has introduced his topic, he's engaged the audience, he's presented the big points, and he's indicated rules for questioning. Now, let's take a look at this body presentation, or the body of the presentation, which starts here. Okay, so he says, in many African universities, English is the primary language of instruction and research. However, most doctoral students are multilingual, often using a local language at home and English for academic purposes. This complex linguistic environment can lead to unique challenges in academic writing, especially when students are expected to meet international publication standards. The aim of this study was to identify the main academic writing challenges faced by multilingual doctoral students and explore the strategies they use to overcome them. So remember, the first part of our presentation, we're presenting our aim. I focused on two research questions. What specific difficulties do students face when writing research papers and dissertations in English? What support systems or strategies help them improve their academic writing? So right there, Samuel Tesfaye has indicated the aim and the research questions in the beginning of his presentation. Now, he moves to that second main point, or his method section. I conducted a qualitative case study at one public university in Ethiopia. Data were collected through semi-structured interviews with 12 doctoral students from 3 different disciplines: education, public health, and engineering. I also analyzed writing samples, including draft chapters and published articles. Okay, so really terrific. He's presented his method section there. That would be his second big point. Now we're going to get to the third point. One major challenge reported by students was organizing complex ideas in clear academic English. Students also struggled with discipline-specific vocabulary, citation style, and self-confidence. However, many found peer feedback and writing workshops helpful. Several students said that working with supervisors who gave language feedback rather than just content comments made a big difference. So again, this is really short. It's very much an abridged presentation, but we can see the structure of it here. The author has presented their aim, their research questions, they presented their methods, and then finally they presented their findings. Now let's go to that last part, our conclusion. And the author signposts, he says, to conclude, this study shows that multilingual doctoral students are highly capable, but face systemic barriers when it comes to academic writing. Universities could support them better by offering targeted writing support, discipline-specific writing models, and opportunities for peer review. Thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to take any questions. So I think this student did a really great job of structuring this presentation well. Even though, again, this is very short, it follows that required structure. All right, thank you so much for doing such a great job and for staying with me for the entirety of this video. I look forward to seeing you in our next academic writing and research video here at the Language Arts Gallery.